Okay, hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Farb from Flower Turbines. We seem to be having a few technical problems with Zoom, but we see our guest, Andrew Ackerman, very, very clearly, which I'm very glad about. And I'm very glad to have him here. I've known Andrew for many years. I will let him introduce himself and his very interesting career.
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. So again, I'm Andrew Ackerman. I've been investing in early stage startups almost 20 years now. And I started off life as a consultant. I did two startups and worked at a family office along the way. And somewhere in the mid 2000s, I made my first angel investment. Probably something I should never have invested in. It was a pharmaceutical company. I know nothing about pharmaceutical companies, but I got lucky, so I was hooked. Uh, Around 2014, I ended up joining Dream Adventures, which was one of I guess, the third oldest accelerator in the world, and one of the top accelerators at the time. And then I started working with startups at scale. Somewhere, I think, Daniel, what was it, 2018 or 2019 when we met? Do you
Uh,
remember?
I'd have to check. It may have even been 2017.
Okay. Let's call it plus or minus 2018. Uh, that was shortly after I'd started to focus on prop tech and construction tech and anything to do with the built environment. I met Daniel, Dr. Dan. I met Daniel and like I just loved his solution. So we ended up investing in Daniel and bringing his company into the program.
Yeah, thanks. So can you tell me a little bit about the two companies you started when you yourself were an entrepreneur?
Hmm. Sure. They had the least you could possibly do with prop tech or construction tech. The first one was a company called Bunk One, which we best describe today as SaaS for summer camps. So everything from, and remember, this is going back to 2000, uh, being able to access the secure way photos that the camp took of your kids, um, send them messages that didn't involve them sitting in front of a device, and then ultimately grew into an entire camp management software platform. I did that for about 8 years before getting bought out. And then after a few years running a family office, I did another company called Layer Cake, which was about parents' digital memories, everything from photos to videos to audio to even just like written notes, making it easy for them to kind of capture and organize all that information in one place.
And were you the programmer or the person with the idea? Uh,
No,
what was it?
no. I can do some basic JavaScript, but it's a little bit more like when your kid comes back to you and they've done like this crayon drawing and you put up on the refrigerator, that's the level of my JavaScript. No. So for the first startup, I was the COO. So there were three of us, three founders. It's a little bit unusual to have a COO at that stage, but we had one guy that was in charge of tech, one guy that was really good at sales. So I was effectively the chief everything else officer on that one. On the second one, I was recruited to be the CEO by a guy who had had the idea and had put some initial funding in. But he came up through the restaurant world, so he was kind of very clear on what he didn't know. And originally, the vision was he would be a very involved director. So I went out there and I recruited my own CTO, wonderful guy, still in touch with today, and that was the plan to develop Layer Cake.
Uh-huh. Very interesting. Now, since our audience hasn't read the book yet, since it isn't officially out, although you can reserve it on Amazon, maybe you could describe the book for the audience.
Sure, sure. So it's kind of the book I wish somebody had written for me before I made all the mistakes that I wrote. So what do I mean by that? Right. So The Entrepreneur's Odyssey is written as a novel, right? I find that novels are far more memorable. Stories are more memorable, and certainly a more pleasant way to get information across. But it's written as the novel of one founder's journey from being a solo founder with an idea all the way through until he secures his first round of funding. And along the way, we cover everything that he had to do and everything he had to learn to make that startup a success. And it's my way of distilling all the information that I've picked up over the two startups I've run, the 70 startups or more that I've invested in, and the hundreds of startups that I've worked with, advised in one shape or another, but just to distill it down into a very memorable, very concise, um, you know, a handbook, for lack of a better word.
Now, if I were going to be as obnoxious as one of the characters in the book, uh,
Usually the ones based on me are the obnoxious.
um, so why do we need another business book?
Mm. So yeah, I mean, listen, um, when you have a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. So why don't we treat this almost like a pitch, right? So what's my problem slide? If I were pitching the book. So here's the issue, right? There is startup information out there, but it's fragmented. Most of the other places you'll see it are among, a bunch of different blogs, right? Some of which are quite good, some of which are quite crappy. But if you're a first-time founder, not really obvious at first glance. So if you got really lucky and had a lot of time, you could assemble a lot of the advice, in one place. But it'd be patchy. You'd miss certain things, right?
Right.
You'd pick up some advice from people that really shouldn't be giving advice. So that's hard. There were a couple of books out there, or more than a couple of books out there about, kind of textbook-y, here's your seven-step guide, or here's Lean Canvas framework expanded. But those are really, really like my eyes glaze over, boring textbooks. Um, you know, I went to, between undergrad and business school, the only book that I remember, the only textbook I remember of all of my textbooks was a book called The Goal. And the only reason I remember it is because it was written like a novel, and it was everything you needed to know about strategy and operations to turn around a company in novel form. And here's not ironically, that was the inspiration for me writing the book the way I did. And by total and complete chance, the publisher I ended up landing with is the same publisher as the one that publishes The Goal.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I can say from my experience too with startup classes, business schools, and so forth, is that, for example, if I were to compare your book with, let's say, the books on startups by Professor Blank from Stanford,
Hmm.
uh, is that they're very good, they're excellent. Or you look at some of the other business books by the famous business gurus, they don't give you the sense of what it's really like to talk to some of the people that you meet. And so you may learn to do something straight this way and do an analysis that way. But to get the interaction and how you deal with the people, that's what is really missing from those.
And that's a great point, Daniel. So, um, you know, put aside for the fact that, like, what would you rather read, a novel or a textbook? Um, there's what's it feel like to be a founder? Right. So like people who are actually doing their startup right now, or maybe they're in an entrepreneurship course in university, we get it. Like one already knows what it feels like. The other will eventually, because that's what they want to do with their life. But what if you're working in a large company, and you have an idea and you're itching to work on it, but you just don't know what it's like? What is a day to day in the startup feel like? Right. It's not like the Steve Jobs biopics. It's not like, the Facebook movie. It's very, very different. So what I tried to get across in this book, uh, in addition to all the specifics, is what's it actually feel like to be a founder going through the steps of really forming and the first, forming a company, figuring out what customers actually need, and going through all the steps that ultimately get you to that first round of financing.
Okay, so that's nice. So one of the things I'd like you to do is assume that you are a startup and you're telling us about your book, and you give a formula for how you'd like an elevator pitch. Now, what if you were to make an elevator, sort of entertain us a little bit with how you would
Sure.
make an elevator pitch on your book and
Great.
why you would say what you're going to say?
Got it. So Daniel likes to make me eat my own dog food. So I talk about this in the sessions that I give for my and other accelerator programs. And I talk about this a lot in the book. But the general format for a startup's elevator pitch is uh, my startup, insert your name right here, does, tell me what you do, including like your special sauce that makes you different from everything else. Uh, and we service, the order can vary, so don't worry about the order. But we want to, we service the X trillion dollar industry, specifically, who you sell to. within that industry. And unlike, fill in the blank, some high level competitors, we are the only one that can do X, Y, Z. So tell people why you're different. And then you want to end with a little bit of your traction and what you're asking for, right? We're already doing $100,000 ARR, and we're looking to raise, $10 million to get to $5 million in annual revenue within the next 18 months. Something like that is your typical elevator pitch for the book. Now, sorry, for a startup. Now, this is a little different, right? I'm not raising money for the book. It's already out there. So I probably, that won't be my ask, but the ask can be different. So let's see, let's take a stab at doing this as an elevator pitch for the book in the context of why anyone listening to this should buy it, right? So, I'd start with, the Entrepreneur's Odyssey is, to my knowledge, the only startup guide for people who are currently or thinking about founding a startup that's written as a novel with engaging characters in memorable scenarios, unlike all the other advice out there, which either exists as scattered blog posts of varying quality or textbooks also of varying quality, but certainly kind of bland and boring. This is the only one to use a particularly memorable format, such as the novel or the story, to get its point across. Um, it's currently available for pre-order on Amazon, and for the first 100 pre-orders, I am actually reserving a bunch of time in startup sessions, the kind of sessions that I normally give only to accelerator programs that I'm affiliated with. I'm putting aside 4 or 5 master classes on topics ranging from uh, prospecting for investors, putting together the perfect pitch deck, the art of the elevator pitch, and I'm making it available to the first 100 people who pre-order the book. Now, the wrong thing about what I did is it took way, way, way too long. Should be about 30 seconds. But, if I were on the other side of the table from something like me, this would be my starting point to kind of hone it down, cut it down, sharpen it, and get it into a nice, concise 20 to 30 pitch, 30-second elevator pitch for the book.
So if I can act like I'm on the other side of the table, and
Yeah.
we're both having a little bit of fun here, right? I would say you say that you're directing your audience for the book
Mhm.
is startup uh, people themselves. So I would say that's a pretty small population. Of course, we always want to have a very large customer
Mhm.
base. So I would like to ask you, maybe it's also of interest to people who are thinking of investing in startups as well. So, for example, right now, while we're crowdfunding, there may be 50 to 70 companies that are on the Start Engine website, but we have 25,000 followers who
Mhm.
might be interested. So, why not direct your pitch to those? It's a bigger audience.
Sure. Sure. So every startup goes through the process of figuring out what their ideal customer profile is, their ICP, their core customer segment, whatever you call it. And that's tough, right? It's tough to get that right. And then there's always this kind of temptation. What about these guys too? Or what about these guys also? Uh, when I tell an early stage startup is know your initial market segment really, really strongly, have good theses about where else you might go, but you can't be everywhere at once, especially not at the earliest stages. Now, with a book, it's a little bit different, right? Like I've written the book already. To whom it appeals to and whether I can make it to appeal to multiple segments, that's already done. So, truth be told, I sometimes say, like, listen, it's for startup founders and the startup curious. It could be someone who's thinking about leaving their job, or they're not going to, but they're kind of curious what that would be like. Heck, I mean, if you're a founder right now and your mom's still asking you, like, are you going to go to law school or not? You can buy the book and give it to her so she finally has an idea what you really do with your time. And then, absolutely, like, if you're an investor, I think just find it really, really interesting. But it might also be the kind of thing where it's like, you know what? Anytime I have like a startup coming to me and it's like they're really early in their journey, I'm just going to tell them they should buy this book. So they could very much be, if not direct customers, a good sales channel. There's not a lot in there from the perspective of an investor. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not written as if to potential angel investor about how to be better at what they do. Though, if you do read it, you will start seeing the difference between, say, what's a great total addressable market slide and what's a horrible market slide. Right? You will understand, when I talk about, doing your customer discovery or really, really honing what your problem and solution are. Um, you'll start to see the difference between like what's a really good problem and solution slide and what's kind of meh. So you might, just by seeing where the bar is, raise the bar for yourself as an investor.
By the way, talking about problem solution slides, I see that you picked mine there, and on in I think what it's chapter 16,
Yeah.
and I want to say it's your credit because you were the one that pushed me through that. So
I'll see you that and I'll raise you. The hour before I came on, I was giving a session for one of the Latin American cohorts from Seed Stars about the perfect pitch deck, and your slides are in there too. You know this, I know this, but for the benefit of the other people listening, one of the reasons I chose Daniel's slides is that a good problem and solution slide hit all the right points, but they're also mirror images of each other, right? So if your problem slide has talked about, in the case of flower turbines, that traditional windmills are too big, and you put them too close together, there's wind turbulence, and they're noisy, right? And you need wind speeds that are pretty strong before they actually work. Well, his solution slide was the mirror image. It's like, hey, these are a lot smaller. I think you said about 3 meter diameter, right? They work in low wind speeds. They're as quiet as the wind itself. So it's a very good example of like, here's my problem. And then for every single one of those elements in the problem, here's how I've solved them. So it just worked very well.
okay, well, great, thank you. Now, one thing I'm wondering is, did you have any really interesting and maybe even horrible experiences that made you wish you had read the book before? And can you tell us any kind of like juicy stories about?
Yeah, so I'll take an example of what we did in my very, very first startup. That if I really understood and absorbed the concept of a minimum viable product, would have saved us a bunch of time and money. So the first startup that we did, I think, as I mentioned, we were working with summer camps, right? We were particularly summer camp parents, right? Summer camp would use our software and then they would pay for it or they'd pass the cost along to their parents. But really, like when June rolled around, we went from having like, handfuls of users to having hundreds of thousands of users as parents dropped their kids off at camp and all of a sudden logged on and wanted to see photos or send them messages. So one of the things that we'd had in our original business plan was to create an e-commerce platform where they could buy everything from like the camp logoed gear all the way to just like they need a canteen, they need a sleeping bag, they need socks. So we spent a lot of time building a multi-vendor store. Now, for those of you who are like remotely near my age and remember what it was like in the early 2000s, that was hard. There was no GitHub, there were no APIs. We were building everything from scratch. And it took us a lot of time and it cost us, what doesn't seem like a lot of money compared to, maybe some of the other startups, but a lot of money for us. And then we opened up the store one season and then there were crickets. And the reason was, we found this out afterwards. Um, at that point in Bunk One's existence, if a parent were interested, the only time they really got interested was after they dropped their kid off, right? They dropped their kid off, they got a printout. It's like, here we're using Bunk One's photo gallery and bunk notes to send messages. So they came home and they registered right there. Well, guess what? It's too late to buy supplies for your kid at that point. Now, what we ended up doing, like, we scrapped the whole thing and we ended up putting a link to just one store that had a lot of the product that we needed. And we just got like, 6% affiliate deal with them. We could have done that for season one. And we could have used that and it would have told us, hey, no one's clicking through. Oh, because they have no reason to be on bunk one prior to when they've already sent their kid to camp. So had we done that, we would have realized this wasn't the product to build, or at least it wasn't the product to build until we were doing the entire camp management software, in which case then the parents were coming on as early as October right, to register for the next year. So it wasn't until we built that other tool 3 or 4 years later that it made sense, even conceptually, to try to turn the switch on the e-commerce side on camp supplies. But we didn't know that, and we were young and stupid when we were young and stupid. So we did it the hard way, and we built everything where we could have just figured that out for $0 just by putting a link on the site to an affiliate.
Yeah. So actually, that was part of one of the things that I enjoyed about the book is seeing you take Marcus, the protagonist, through the steps of uh, disposing of the extras that were in his business plan and getting down to the MVP.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, like any startup out there, almost without exception, even the ones that you hear raised like, a $20 million seed round, there's never the resources that they want to do everything. There never is. So it's absolutely critical that you boil it down to this is what I need to launch my startup. Now, it's hard sometimes for founders with a grand vision to jettison the stuff that's not necessary, or at least to put it as, oh, this is going to be stage 2 or stage 3. But you really want to get it down to the point where if you only offered these two critical elements and you put it in the hand of a customer, they'd be like, awesome, I need that. And they might say, well, can I do A, B, and C too? It's like, yeah, it's on the drawing board for later. If they're saying, well, okay, I really want those, but I need it right now, you have an MVP. Now, if they were like, well, I really need those before I can use the other two features, and you don't have an MVP, you might have to add that other feature in. But really, it's an active reduction, right? You start off with your vision and you ask yourself, if I were to launch without feature number 10, would the customer still use it? Okay, awesome. What if I launched without feature number 9? And you keep going down that list till you get to the point where like, no segment of my market can really use it that way. And then you know you've hit the MVP.
Just for the benefit of our listeners, MVP is minimal viable product. It's the simplest kind of product that you can make that you can sell. Uh,
Yeah.
so, talking about what the different characters did, I was wondering who's your favorite character in the book? I'll tell you mine. I enjoyed Jason, the cranky angel investor. And I was even thinking, Andrew, that he was saying a lot of things you would like to say, but you're too polite to say in person. So tell me if that's true and tell me who's your favorite
Well, the false
characters.
part is I'm not that polite. I would say them in person. So yeah, so thank you about that. So when I wrote the book, there were a couple of challenges that I thought faced as a writer. So number one, I've written a lot, but all the stuff that I've written in the past, I don't know, 10 years has been like 500 to 800 word articles that have been placed in different publications in the startup or the trade world. So, being able to just simply write a 250 page book, I wasn't sure I could do it. But more subtly, or maybe related to that, is when you're writing articles, it's just your voice. And that's okay. That seems to work for me. I have a voice that people seem to like. By the way, voice with quotes. Most people like hate the sound of my voice, but at least when it's in print, it comes across okay. But now I had multiple characters, and I had to figure out a way to make the characters sound like different people. Now, I don't know what other writers do, because it's not really what I've been trained at. But for me, the way it worked was I had a very specific person or people in mind that were kind of my templates, real life people, my templates for the characters. So, for instance, and he doesn't know it yet, but there's one of my founders, and I'll give you a hint, and maybe I'll give him a hint, in the ed tech programs that we ran, where what I really liked about him was that he had this kind of mentality. He's unflappable, first of all, which I kind of loved, but his mentality was always like, hey, I have a reason for doing it the way I'm doing it. But if you tell me something, you present me with other facts or, a different logical argument that tells me that maybe that's not the best way to do it, then no problem. I'll change it. No ego involved. And that's the right attitude for a founder. I wish I could remember who told me this, but the phrase that always stuck in my mind is that founders should have well-reasoned but loosely held opinions. And this one particular founder did. So every time I need to put words in Marcus's mouth, I just kind of visualize this founder, how would he say it to me? And that seemed to have worked. Now with Jason, the angel investor, it's a little bit of a blend between me and this one angel investor named John Asen, who's since deceased, unfortunately. But he was one of the OG, the original gangsters of the New York angel scene. I actually had the opportunity to do a road trip with him to Korea to look at a bunch of startups. He's a little bit of crotchety old man in some ways, but really heart of gold and super, super sharp. So I wanted a little bit of that, directness that he had. Uh, you know, he really didn't sound that much like it. It's really more me than him, but I wanted it to be not just me. And then as an homage to him, I created the name Jason from John Asen, as kind of a, recognition where recognition is due.
So I thought it was interesting that he actually invested fairly soon into the process. I would have thought that he would have made it a lot harder on Marcus.
Yeah. So that actually was actually pretty true to John. He was a seed stage investor. He would get in at the earliest stages. So for the benefit of the people who haven't read the book, which is pretty much everyone out there that I didn't give an advanced draft to, um, Jason, the character in the book, writes a $25,000 check to Marcus, the entrepreneur, when he's at the product, say 80% done stage. And this is a particular case where at that point, Marcus is a solo founder and he hasn't quit his day job yet. But the problem that he's solving is so compelling to John, and it's a space that John knows, sorry, in this case, Jason, the character, the investor, knows so well. And he was impressed enough by Marcus as an investor, as a founder, that he's like, hey, if I give you 25,000 bucks, can you quit your day job and get to a product rollout? And Marcus could do it, so he wrote that check. Um, the actual process of closing the real seed round, that's really what the rest of the book leads up to. Some investors will still do that. It depends on the industry. If you could go further on your own without getting money, the investor is almost always going to want you to do that. Uh, you should, right? What can you do for $1? What can you do for less? We don't like to invest in people who haven't thought about the more efficient ways to do things. But depending, if you're working on something where you just can't get beyond a certain point without money, if it's compelling enough, we'll get involved relatively early. Again, depending on specific investors, not every investor, but some.
Is the enterprise that you use in the book call jar, which for the benefit of the people listening, it's a transcription app that could be used by, let's say, real estate agents and others. Is that based on any particular experience?
So it's funny, actually. It's a company that I've been developing in nights and weekends with two other friends, two more technically advanced friends than me. We may or may not roll it out. Like it's taken the problem with nights and weekend projects are that they evolve very slowly. So that's why it was really important for Marcus in the book, if he was going to do this, to kind of get off, fish or cut bait, right? And he had to really get in on this full time. So it's taken us a lot longer to roll out what we wanted to roll out. Actually, the real company is called Call Vault. It's not up yet. Hopefully soon it'll be in the Play Store. Um, One thing that's kind of interesting about it, right? So I was looking for, sorry, the right company to use as simplified version of the company to use in the book. And I had one of the startups that I'd, originally worked with in my 2014 cohort of Dream It and Interested, or sorry, as a potential example that I was going to dumb down. But then I thought to myself, like, I wanted an example of a company that could go B2B or go B2C, business to business or business to consumer, uh, because I wanted to have that experience that Marcus has of thinking that he's going to go in one direction. Then, as a result of the conversations with Jason, the investor, and his customer discovery process to pivot, there's that P word, ever partially over from B2B to a B2C, or at least a business to consumer, or at least a small professional, we might call an SMB, a smaller mid-sized business, instead of selling like big enterprise sales projects. And when I started thinking about it that way, it was like, oh my God, that's exactly the process that we went through with where our initial market was going to be for Call Vault. So I ended up just simplifying that and calling it Call Jar. And here's the other ironic thing, right? So this is a speech to text startup. The version in the book is a simplified version of a real speech to text startup. And then to write the book, I wrote about 80% of it kind of mumbling into my phone in 3 or 4 minute jots of time, directly speech to text into Google Docs.
So, also like to ask you, what are some of the best investments that you've made, and how do those founders compare to the founder in the book?
Okay. So, I love all my children equally, but the ones that are doing well get more of an allowance. Yeah, let's start with one of the strongest founders that I worked with. He's a guy named LD. His company's Chariots in the real estate space. If you're in the space, you know them. If you're not, you've never heard of them. So a couple of things about LD that are different than Marcus. This is actually his fourth startup. He's had at least two, if not three exits. At least one of them is bigger than my exits. That's fine. I love investing in guys like that. Not a good example for the book because he's already learned about a lot of these things. But there was one situation that actually happened when he went through the program that was an awesome example of the loosely held but well reasoned but loosely held mentality that a founder should have. So it got to the point in the program where we were getting ready for the investor roadshow, and I said, "LD, we got to put together a one pager for Cherry." By the way, I'm not really sure people use my one pagers anymore, but at the time, and I still think it's a good idea to use, but at the time, a lot of the VCs wouldn't even look at the full deck. They wanted that one pager to decide if it was really even worth their time to look at a full deck. John Asen, who Jason is based on, was a big fan of nailing your one pager. Now, LD, he was like, you know what? I also invest in startups on the side. I never look at one pagers. I don't care about them. I just want to see the deck. So I don't really want to do a one pager. I said, LD, listen, it's your company. It's your choice at the end of the day. But if I had to estimate, there's probably a good 30 to 50% of the potential investors out there who, if you don't send them a one pager, they're not even going to look at your deck. If you want to write off a third to half of your, potential funnel, top of funnel for potential investors, it's your business. If you'd like to put a half hour together into pulling together a decent one pager, right, because you're most of the way there content wise, then at least we can open up that additional 30 to 50% of the prospects. He thought about it for a minute. He's like, okay, fine, we'll do a one pager. Right. So great example of the mindset that a good founder has.
Now, a lot of our audience consists of equity crowdfunding, obviously,
Mhm.
investors. Now, do you have any advice for them on picking early stage investments and how they can make that asset class part of their portfolio in the best way possible?
Sure, sure. So um, I have certain advantages over an equity crowd investor because of the amount of access that I often have to the founder before making my decision. If you're putting $1,000 into a startup that you find online, you probably won't be able to sit down and talk to the investor, multiple times. So it's a little hard for you to get a sense of, are they the kind of investor like startup founder like LD, where they have that mentality that they're going after, the loosely held but well-reasoned opinions. So that's one that's going to be hard for you to get in that concept, but you can nail the fundamentals. Right? You can absolutely nail the fundamentals. So let's say you're looking at, total addressable market. Like I feel extremely strongly that your TAM is total addressable market is one number. And not only that, it's one number that's built from the bottom up, meaning it's not, oh, the amount of revenue that goes into alternate energy generation in the world is, $17 trillion. Made that up, probably more, right? That kind of top-down number is meaningless, right? Because any startup is, you're not competing with that entire market. You're only dealing in one small part of that market. And what's more, even if you actually identify the software that you're replacing because you're so much better than them and you found that number, you're not pricing the same way they are. Like, what happens if you have your solution is we do everything they do, but we do it half the price, so we're going to sell it at half the price. Well, guess what? Your TAM is actually half of what the market looks like when you just look at them because their price is half. Or conversely, we do everything they do, but we do it so much better that we're going to charge twice as much for our service. Right? We do everything they do and we do more stuff. We charge twice as much. If you just took, their sales and said, oh, their sales is the total market, you'd be undercounting your market by half. So the right way to look at it is, hey, I'm charging X dollars per customer per month, if that's your model. That times 12 times the 3 million people in the US that could actually be paying for your service, boom, that's your total addressable market. So if you find a founder who thinks about their market that way and who has laid that out for you, like you got a founder who's thinking crisply about the problem. If you've got one that's like, oh, that my Tam Sam sum, those, that like it looks like almost like a melting snowman where you've got a big circle, little circle, smaller circle. And the big number is like the total market's a huge number, probably with a trillion at the end of it. And there's another number that's smaller and another number smaller in between. Um, like, I don't be a little bit kind to them. They were probably misled, but you're gonna have to do extra work to figure out what's really the total addressable market. You're gonna have to go do the work to like work backwards and like, okay, let me go back to their revenue slide. Okay, they say it's like, these many people, this is what they're charging. Great. I don't see how many customers there are in the deck because he's doing some top-down BS. So I'm going to go out there, I'm going to Google around and find out how many actual customers there are there. And then you're going to have to recreate the total market just so that you know that it's big enough to warrant an investment. Um, so that's, once and this is just one example, but once kind of my not so humble opinion, the right way certain materials should be presented, you as an investor, even without direct content, like a dialogue with the potential founder, you can kind of recreate the numbers that you need, the data that you need to make a better decision.
So talking about total addressable market, I was glad to see that the other slide of mine that you included in the book was doing the total addressable market, starting with the windy areas of the country and the
Mhm.
number of buildings that there were, and that, and how if you were just talking about the real estate market in the United States, is that you would arrive at it that way. And you also like the fact that I had a map there that showed
Yeah.
where in the United
Just to be
States.
fair to the listeners, right? I use a couple of examples of all the slides in there, and I think I have three examples of different ways to show your total addressable market in the book. The thing that I loved about yours is you're very explicit in that equation. As I sometimes say that like your addressable market is A times B times C. How much do you charge? How many people are out there that might buy it? And then the solution is just fourth grade math, third grade math. And what I liked about yours is that it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, right? There's only certain parts of the country that have wind that's, viable for your solution, about 30%, if I remember correctly. And you're a hardware product, not a SaaS product. So, but you laid it out very nicely. I think you said there are about 10 million buildings where at this point you were looking at, rooftop installations in kind of more urbanish environments or more developed environments than a 150-foot windmill, would be in. Say about 10 million suitable targets, only 30 of them have suitable wind. So it was 10 million times 30%. Then it was like 10 turbines per install. So you multiplied that by 10. Each turbine at the time was somewhere below 10,000 bucks, 7,000,
Yeah, I
something
think
like that.
so. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
changed. There's been a little inflation Also
Yeah, I would
change.
imagine. And I hope you have onshore sources of the turbines and you're not bringing them from China. Um, but hey, let's keep it fun, right?
Yeah,
So
well,
whatever
we're
that the dollar amount
manufacturing
was.
in Texas, but
Oh, perfect.
yeah,
Perfect.
but a lot of the parts have to come from China. There's no choice.
Okay, well, that's going to be a headache you'll deal with, I'm sure. But what I just laid out for you, you actually lay that out as a mathematical equation. At the very top, on top of that graph, it's 10 million times 30% of the country times 10 turbines per install times, call it $10,000 per turbine. So it's A times B times C times D equals E, and that was your number, and it was something like 200 billion, $300 billion. And when I presented it this morning to the class, I said, listen, I keep telling you that investors love SaaS and not every investor is comfortable with hardware. A $200 billion market, that helps me get a lot comfortable with hardware.
Right. Now, other things about equity crowdfunding, I'd just like to say that one thing I've noticed, and I'd like to hear your take on this, is that instead of, as compared to venture capital, where let's say if you're part of a VC group and you're investing in something, everyone in that VC group very likely, because they're specializing in your area, has somebody in their Rolodex that they can call up and say, how would you like to be a customer for them
Yep.
or something like that. And equity crowdfunding, you don't have that, but you also have uh, thousands of people, many of whom like your product and want to tell people about it, and sometimes they're interested in it themselves. So it's like I would say it's kind of like the Coca-Cola. Imagine that few million people have stock in Coca-Cola, and they're going to buy Coca-Cola instead of Pepsi if they have stock in Coca-Cola because they feel a part of it. So on the one hand, I've gotten from the equity crowdfunding some very nice leads. I'm not sure how many of them really turned out well, but we have some enthusiastic people who've been in touch with me personally and I've also enjoyed that very much. Uh, whereas, but I don't think it was be as targeted as if, let's say, uh, one of the companies that's involved in venture
Yeah.
capital. So I was wondering what your take is on
Yeah.
that and other differences between the two
Well,
types of ways of getting capital.
so we already talked a little bit about, from the investor's perspective, the kind of access you might have. Like if I'm going to write $1 million check leading a $2 million seed round or $3 million seed round, like I can ask the founder almost for as many meetings as I want. That's obviously not an advantage that an investor who's an equity crowdfunding investor has. On the other hand, like you could put $1,000 in, and I can't put like small numbers like that in. The point you raised is real. Like the best VCs are offering more than money. Now, it could be access to talent, it could be access to customers. Also, like, if you get to know your VC, you know how much money they have reserved for follow-ons. And even if, they're not going to do your entire A round, 18 months down the road, they have networks of other investors and they can pick up the phone and, hey, um, you know, hey, First Mark, here's a company. Well, that's not their seed round investor, but they can call up any VC and say like, hey, I know you guys do Series A. Here's one that's in our portfolio. We're exercising our full pro rata, meaning we're investing, as much as we have the right to invest in, but there's room for a lot more. Would you come join the round? And that's generally not something that's going to happen, in the crowdfunding space. On the other hand, you do get those kind of referrals, in a weird sort of way. My book is better suited to equity crowdfunding, and yours might be better suited to a traditional route because you're selling $100,000 installs. So it's really hit or miss if like one of your investors happens to be in commercial real estate or happens to be in alternative energy and can make some introductions. On the other hand, having 100,000 small investors behind, say, a consumer product, that's great. Like they start using it, they use it repeatedly. They tell all their friends come over and they see they're using it. So it could actually become a bit of a marketing agent engine for itself, which is also like, yeah, I've told you this before. I don't really like um, Shark Tank, right? I don't think it faithfully represents what my world is like. But I tell any company that's consumer focused that go on it. It's free exposure. Even if most of those deals fall apart and don't actually, go the distance and become an investment, you're getting free press. And a lot of those companies have gotten a bump in sales just by being on it, even if they never got investment money. So, in many ways, this is better suited, I think, to B2C, though I don't have any data for that. It would be very cool to hear what Start Engine has to say about it. I will say you do have one thing um, that is a great advantage for equity found crowdfunding. You have a product that is tangible and exciting, and it hits one of the things that people really want to do because it's things that we need to do, as an ecosystem. Right? People can see it. Wow, that's different, and it's solving a pressing problem, and they want to be a part of it. Uh, if you were instead, oh, we do SaaS software for mining companies, that's not sexy. Most people can't like see it and get it. They don't know that it's not like 17 zillion other software packages out there. You really have to, you really, as an equity crowdfunder, would have to go deeper into that industry and really like that industry for whatever reason to do SaaS for a mining company. So you actually, you have something that's a little bit more sexy in that regard for equity crowdfunding.
Yeah, so I find that interesting. I do get the sense that in equity crowdfunding, we attract a lot more of, I'd say, the impact type of investment, the people who feel they would like to make a difference. I think that's one thing I've noticed. Um, from my point of view, in
By the way,
terms
would you like to know why that's the case?
why that's
So,
the case,
yeah, so impact to create a VC fund that's sometimes we might call it impact investing, or I might call it double bottom line, meaning financial and some other goal. It's a really hard thing to do, right? So I have other LPs, investors in my fund. When it's just focused on making money, that's hard enough to raise money for. But when I'm going out there and trying to do those two different things, like what's the trade-off between another percentage point of ROI, return on investment, versus, I don't know, saving lives in Africa or having more kids complete grade school. It's an apples to orange calculation. And what often happens is like I fall in love with the impact and the ROI isn't there. And then ironically, if the ROI isn't there, the company goes out of business. They don't have impact anyway. So it's really, really hard to have funds that on an ongoing basis over the decades can do that kind of double bottom line or impact investing, but because they have to satisfy their own investors. But an individual who's like, I have $10,000 in my pocket. I want to make money on it, but I want to do it in a way that furthers, decarbonization or, better healthcare for all. They don't have to answer to anybody except maybe their spouse. So power to them. They can make that investment.
right? I find that one of the things that is a little bit difficult for me, being involved in equity crowdfunding, is that there's not the level of certainty that allows you to budget correctly the way that you could if, let's say, I went somewhere and I said, and I learned that, well, we've got 5 million, it's coming in these tranches, and so forth. Then I can budget, I can figure how many people I can hire for a certain amount of time, uh, all of these different things. Whereas the uncertainty of equity crowdfunding makes that more difficult.
Yeah, I mean the truth is that nothing is 100% predictable, right? The fund that you have, they might have extra dry powder, meaning they may have more money to invest. And when it comes time for you raising the money, for whatever reason, they might not invest, right? Maybe the partner that championed you has left and the other guys don't love you as much. Or maybe they just invested too much of their money in other stuff. So it's not 100% predictable. but at least you have more of a sense. If I'm really hitting my numbers, they're going to want to put more money in. With the equity crowdfunding world, like, do investors follow on and make a, like, hey, I invested, $5,000 the first time around, and they seem to be making great progress. I'm going to put 15 in now. I don't know. I don't have that data. I think it would be really interesting to get.
So I haven't formally compiled that data, but I do see that there are a lot of repeat investors. Um,
Okay.
uh,
Okay. So I
so
guess over time, like if you were, if I mean, maybe Start Engine should put this data out there. They might say like, hey, when these companies raise subsequent rounds, you can expect, X% to come back. And maybe that would help you budget a bit more.
yeah.
I don't know.
I'd like to get back to asking you a question about the book. What if you had sent the hero of your book to an accelerator or something like that? Would you have recommended that for him or not?
So it's actually, we talk about that explicitly in a bunch of the chapters. And so I talked about challenges in writing the book. So one of the other challenges was, how do I get this material across in a story form? And it's not two people looking at a pitch deck, at a coffee table in a WeWork somewhere. So I had to embed these lessons in other stories. So there is a point in the book where Marcus is invited to join an accelerator. And he's trying to think about it. And ironically, where he's thinking about it is in his martial arts class. So he's in the dojo, getting the crap beat out of him. Not really, but they're sparring. Uh, and it kind of occurs to him along the way that the thought about how to or if to join an accelerator wasn't all that different than the thought process that he went through trying to decide which martial arts form and which dojo he wanted to join. And like when you're looking at that, let's take the fitness example. Like some people join a gym or a martial arts class for fitness reasons. Others are joining it for the actual ability to defend themselves should the need arise. Some people might be doing it just purely for social reasons. Now, you could join an accelerator because you've never raised a round of financing. You think you're really good at sales, no problem, but you know nothing about the VC round, so you're joining it for that. Or conversely, you might be coming in as like, listen, I got a great product. I just don't know how to sell something like this. So the ability to, learn from the best and know how to sell, how to either be a growth hacker if you're more B2C or to do enterprise sales if you're targeting large companies, you may want those skills. Or for the very early, maybe you're so early in the process and you just need help formulating what kind of product you're going to be. Which direction do you go? What's your best customer profile? You might need a program that really walks you through those essential elements to make sure you're even pointed in the right direction, you develop the right thing. So depending on what you are looking for and the skills you already have versus the skills you want to get, the network you already have versus the network you want to get, the choice of which accelerator makes sense, or if any of them does. So um, the thought process for Marcus is, well, he's already got Jason in his back, uh, not back pocket, but in on his back in a good way. Jason has his back and is making introductions. So on the one hand, it'd be great to have more Jasons in your team. On the other hand, there's diminishing marginal returns at some point. And remember, for each one of those people you're bringing in, like you're giving them a piece of the company. So yeah, it depends on the startup whether or not an accelerator makes sense, and certainly depends on the startup which accelerator makes sense for them.
Very nice. So we're at the end of an hour. I don't want to keep you too long. Are there any last things you'd like to say about your book and when it's coming out uh,
Sure.
and what kind of reception you've had so far?
Yeah, yeah. So right now this is what I call the pre-marketing phase. So I've been doing a lot of these guest appearances, mostly online, some in person. I've actually had a couple of weird, funny mistakes. I thought for one of the in-person events, it would be cool to make these nice like bookmarks to leave on the seat behind me. And I had one design. I have a couple interns. One of them is really, really good. And she created a bookmark with an image of the book. It had a QR code. It had like you turn it over for testimonials. I have a lot. Thankfully, I've been blessed with a lot of people who gave me good reviews, including Dave Brown, who founded Techstars, and all the founders of Dream It, and Avi Savar, who ran it when one of the formative moments. So I picked two of the testimonials. I put them on the back. We made these bookmarks. The one thing that we didn't do is we didn't read the fine print. They weren't actually the full like 3 or 4 inch bookmarks. They were, see if you can see this, a mini bookmark. This is like 3 inches high, and to read the print on it, you almost need a magnifying glass. So I have a couple of hundred of these. So it hasn't all been smooth sailing, but I am trying to think about the book launch the same way I would think about launching a startup. Now, of particular interest to any founders or investors who are listening right now during the pre-order phase, if they do order, I am giving 100 spots to the first 100 orders. I think about 60 or so have already been claimed. Uh, and what that gives them the right to do is these sessions, these master classes that I give, that I develop for my accelerator programs that I give to a few others on prospecting for investors, perfecting your pitch deck, the art of the elevator pitch, how do you do a customer discovery meeting. Uh, I might or might not do I won't do the one pager, but I will do the art of the elevator pitch. Like these are sessions that you can't get into unless you're part of a program. But I'm running about 5 of them sometime next month, I believe. So anyone who buys the book, if you want to be a part of that, send me an email. My email is Andrew, B as in boy, Ackerman at Gmail. Don't tell everyone else, but just for you. Forward your Amazon purchase confirmation email to me, and you can claim that spot. Or if you're an investor and you want to give it to one of your portfolio companies, you can do that too.
Okay, that sounds great. So I can just tell you that I enjoyed the book and I learned from it. It was good review, and I enjoyed the characters too. So
Thank you.
it made it fun. So I'm going to stop the recording now.